People love to talk about financial freedom, but very few understand what it actually means. Most people think it's about having millions of dollars, private jets, or the ability to quit your job and do nothing. That's a Hollywood fantasy, not freedom. Real freedom is much simpler. It's the ability to say no to a bad boss, no to a stupid deal, no to a life you don't want to live, and you don't need millions to buy that. You just need enough capital that the world stops pushing you around. Now, that number isn't the same for everyone, but I've often said that the first few $100,000 are the hardest and the most important. Once you have that, you start playing a different game. You move from surviving to choosing. People underestimate how much leverage even a modest pile of money gives you. $300,000, properly saved and invested, can change your psychology completely. Doesn't mean you'll never work again. It means you'll never have to work desperately again. That's a big difference. You see, the first $300,000 teaches you discipline, patience, and rationality, all the qualities that make you rich in every sense of the word. If you can save that much through your own effort, you've already built the habits that can take you anywhere. The tragedy is that most people never get there because they're too busy chasing shortcuts. They waste their 20s and 30s trying to get rich fast instead of getting disciplined slow. They confuse motion for progress, and they think intelligence can replace endurance. It can't. I've watched very smart people go broke because they lack patience. And I've watched ordinary people quietly become wealthy because they just kept doing the sensible thing for 20 years. The world rewards steady compounding far more than brilliant predictions. So when I say save $300,000 and stop working forever, I don't mean retire to the beach. I mean stop working like a slave to circumstance. Stop trading your sanity for another paycheck. Start letting your money, your judgment, and your time do the heavy lifting. Think of $300,000 as a quiet form of independence. It's not flashy, it's not Instagram worthy, but it changes your internal state. You stop being frightened, you stop being rushed, you stop caring so much about what other people think. You finally have room to think, which is the rarest luxury in the modern world. Now, most people will dismiss this idea. They'll say $300,000 isn't enough to retire. Of course it isn't. But that's not the point. The point is that $300,000, when you build it yourself, represents a mental shift from dependence to autonomy. That's the rule. Save enough that you can think clearly. Because clear thinking, not money, is what buys freedom. Most people never stop to define what enough actually means. They chase numbers the way a dog chases cars, fast, noisy, and pointless. They think freedom lives on the other side of some larger amount, 500,000, 1 million, 10 million. But every time they reach one goalpost, they quietly move it further away. That's how you turn a perfectly decent life into an endless treadmill. I've known a lot of rich men in my time. Most of them weren't free. They were slaves to bigger houses, flashier reputations, and fancier circles of envy. They had more money, but not more peace. They mistook excess for safety. You don't want to live like that. There's no finish line in that game, just higher expenses and shallower meaning. $300,000 isn't a magical figure. It's a psychological milestone. It represents the moment when compounding starts to work harder than you do. It's the stage where your discipline begins to pay visible dividends, not just in dollars, but in self-respect. When you reach that point, something in your brain clicks. You realize you no longer need to beg the world for permission to think long-term. You can finally act like an owner, not a pawn. That's the real meaning of enough. It's not a number on a balance sheet. It's a state of mind where you stop playing life as a desperate survival game. You still work, but you work from choice, not necessity. You still strive, but you do it with calm rather than panic. You're not chasing opportunity, you're selecting it. That difference changes the texture of every decision you make. Now, people will argue that $300,000 isn't enough in today's world, and they're right. If you're addicted to consumption, if your happiness depends on new gadgets, trendy vacations, and expensive illusions, then no amount will ever feel like enough. The human appetite is infinite if you feed it with comparison. But the man who learns contentment, who learns to live slightly below his means, discovers leverage that no investment ever matches: peace of mind. I've spent a lifetime watching human behavior around money. The biggest losers aren't the foolish or the uneducated. They're the restless. They can't sit still. They can't wait. They mistake boredom for risk and excitement for opportunity. They're always reaching for the next scheme, the next trade, the next promise of instant escape. And because they never define enough, they're always one step away from ruin, no matter how much they earn. If you understand enough, $300,000 becomes more than a sum. It becomes a foundation. You realize that freedom isn't about maximizing return. It's about minimizing dependence. The fewer things you need, the richer you become. It's that simple and that hard, because saying enough requires self-mastery, and self-mastery is rarer than intelligence. When you hit that first milestone, the freedom isn't in the money. It's in the shift of identity. You stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like an investor, not just with your capital, but with your time, your attention, your energy. You stop renting your life to the highest bidder. You begin to see that most of the world's noise, the headlines, the market chatter, the social comparison, is just a distraction from compounding what really matters. I often tell people that getting rich slowly is much easier than staying sane quickly. The first approach requires patience. The second requires luck and usually ends in regret. The beauty of saving $300,000 is that it forces you to develop the temperament that makes the next $300,000 inevitable. You learn how to defer gratification, how to ignore hype, how to respect time as your real partner. Once those habits are built, the math becomes secondary. Most people never reach that point because they sabotage themselves. They want to feel rich before they are rich. They inflate their lifestyle the moment they see a little success. They call it enjoying life, but it's really fear of missing out, fear of appearing ordinary. The irony is that the ordinary path, saving, investing, waiting, is the only one that reliably leads to extraordinary outcomes. You can test this idea yourself. Imagine you have $300,000 saved and no debts. You could live modestly for a while, take a year to think, maybe start a small business or simply choose work you respect. You wouldn't panic at the first sign of trouble. You'd have breathing room, and that breathing room is what makes intelligent thought possible. The absence of constant fear sharpens judgment. It's hard to think clearly when you're worried about rent. Freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want. It's the ability to choose wisely what not to do. When you have a modest cushion of capital, you can walk away from stupidity, bad jobs, bad deals, bad people. That's what money is for. It's a filter that protects your time from being wasted by fools and your energy from being drained by nonsense. Of course, the modern world will never teach you this. The system depends on you staying busy, buying things you don't need with money you don't have to impress people who don't care. It depends on endless dissatisfaction. The day you realize that enough is the ultimate luxury, you become useless to that system, and that's when you start to live on your own terms. Now, let me tell you something most people overlook. The moment you stop needing more, the market starts working for you. You can hold your positions longer. You can ignore the daily noise. You can wait for fat pitches instead of swinging at every ball. That's how real wealth is built, not by frantic activity, but by patient inactivity. Understanding enough is the mental anchor that keeps you steady while the crowd goes mad. It's the antidote to panic, greed, and envy. And until you find it, every dollar you earn will be restless. That's why the $300,000 rule isn't about a number, it's about learning restraint. It's about mastering the only enemy that ever ruins investors, themselves. And once you see that clearly, you'll start to notice something else that matters even more than defining enough, understanding what you're truly working for. Most people spend their lives working for money without realizing that the real game is to make money work for them. The tragedy is that they confuse income with independence. A big paycheck looks impressive, but it's not freedom if you need it to survive. You're still on the hook, you've just upgraded the leash. I've met doctors, lawyers, executives making more in a year than most people see in 5, and yet they're terrified of losing it all. Why? Because they've built lives that collapse the moment the paycheck stops. The house, the car, the private school, all of it depends on a single stream of income they don't control. That's not wealth. That's dependency with better furniture. People think being well paid means they're winning, but true independence isn't about how much you earn. It's about how little you need to keep your life steady. The man who earns modestly but lives below his means is freer than the man earning millions who must keep performing to feed his expenses. The world doesn't talk about that because it's bad for business. Every system around you is designed to keep you consuming, striving, and comparing. Freedom doesn't sell very well. The problem begins early. Society trains you to chase income like a drug. Promotions, bonuses, titles, all sugar hits. You start measuring success in yearly salaries, not in control over your time. Before long, you forget why you're working at all. You end up addicted to motion you can't stop earning, can't stop spending, can't stop proving something to someone you don't even respect. The hamster wheel turns faster, but it's still a wheel. Here's the paradox. The more you depend on income, the less valuable your time becomes. You start trading hours for approval, comfort, and the illusion of progress. But when you have savings, real capital that quietly compounds you buyback optionality, you gain the ability to pause, to think, to wait for better opportunities. You stop being reactive. You start being strategic. That's what the $300,000 rule is really about, creating a foundation strong enough to separate your life from your labor. Most people won't do that. They're too focused on appearing successful to build genuine independence. They'd rather drive a leased luxury car than own a quiet mind. They'd rather have applause now than freedom later. But life punishes those priorities. When you spend everything you earn, you're renting your future to your past. The more you consume, the tighter the chains become. The irony is that the path to true wealth begins the moment you stop caring about appearing rich. The minute you stop inflating your image, you start expanding your runway. You start stacking options. Every dollar not spent is a brick in your wall of freedom. Eventually, that wall becomes tall enough to protect you from nonsense, the nonsense of bad jobs, of market panics, of manipulative people. The people who get this right don't always look successful at first. They drive old cars. They avoid debt. They don't chase fashion. They quietly accumulate. To the untrained eye, they seem ordinary. But under the surface, they're building autonomy, the rarest currency of all. You can't understand this until you experience it. The first time you realize you could quit your job and survive for a year without income, something changes inside you. You start speaking more honestly. You stop tolerating fools. You negotiate differently. You think more long term. In short, you start behaving like an owner, not an employee. That psychological shift is worth more than any raise you'll ever get. Now, I'm not against work. I worked my whole life. But I always viewed work as a platform for thinking and learning, not as a prison of necessity. The point is to reach a position where you can choose your work, not where your work chooses you. Money is just the tool that buys you that privilege. Once you've earned enough to think independently, the game stops being about accumulation and starts being about allocation, how you spend your limited time and energy. That's why chasing income for its own sake is a fool's errand. The world is full of rich men who are spiritually bankrupt, trapped by their own appetites, terrified of losing status. They think they're free because they can buy anything, but they can't buy contentment. They haven't earned the temperament to enjoy what they have. That's what happens when you make income your identity. You forget that the real goal is control over your attention, not your possessions. If you understand this distinction early, you'll structure your life differently. You'll choose work that teaches you, not just pays you. You'll value savings more than status. You'll see every dollar as a seed of future independence. That kind of mindset compounds faster than any investment portfolio. It builds character, judgment, and resilience qualities that no market crash can erase. The truth is, income will always be fragile because it depends on circumstances outside your control, employers, clients, economic cycles. But savings, once built, belong to you. They create a buffer between your emotions and the world's chaos. They let you think in decades instead of days. That's what separates the free from the frantic. So when I say most people confuse income with independence, I mean they've missed the real game entirely. They're so busy earning, they forget to design lives that don't depend on constant earning. They never build the quiet confidence that comes from self-sufficiency. They never experience the calm that comes from having capital quietly compounding in the background, buying back their time, one day at a time. You'll notice something when you reach that point. The noise of the world fades. You stop needing to prove anything. You can listen to your own judgment again. And when you can do that, you start seeing clearly not only what work is worth doing, but also what kind of work you can finally afford to refuse. And that ability to say no with confidence only comes from discipline. You can't buy it, and you can't fake it. You have to earn it through years of intelligent restraint. The discipline required to save your first $300,000 is the same discipline required to live a rational, successful life. They're one and the same. The money is just the visible part of an invisible process. Self-control, delayed gratification, and the ability to ignore what doesn't matter. Most people never make it to that first milestone because they're too impatient. They want to skip the years of quiet accumulation and jump straight to the rewards. But wealth doesn't work that way. Compounding only becomes powerful after it's been boring for a long time. If you can't tolerate boredom, you'll never get rich, at least not in a way that lasts. When I was young, I didn't know anyone who got rich fast and stayed rich. Every lasting fortune I've ever seen was built slowly, brick by brick, on a foundation of consistent saving and sensible investing. It's not glamorous. It's not thrilling. It's methodical. And that's why almost no one does it. Human nature rebels against monotony, but nature itself compounds quietly. Trees grow an inch a year. Wisdom accumulates word by word. The same law applies to money. Saving your first $300,000 isn't about cleverness. It's about endurance. It means saying no hundreds of times to temptations, to distractions, to people who don't think the way you do. It means working steadily while others chase shortcuts. It means delaying comfort now for freedom later. There's no trick to it. You just have to keep going when the excitement fades. People underestimate how hard that is in a culture built on noise. The entire system around you is engineered to erode patience. Advertisers want you impulsive. Media wants you outraged. The market wants you trading. Discipline is rebellion in a world that profits from your distraction. Every dollar you save is an act of defiance against a system that wants you perpetually restless. Most people think they fail because they don't earn enough. In reality, they fail because they can't control what they already have. They spend future earnings as if they're guaranteed. They buy status symbols long before they can afford independence. They mistake consumption for success. The result is predictable. No matter how much they make, they're trapped. The golden handcuffs just get shinier. You see, the first $300,000 is less about financial returns and more about behavioral returns. It teaches you how to resist your worst impulses. It trains you to focus on process, not prizes. It turns saving from a chore into a reflex. Once that shift happens, you start to see the world differently. You stop asking, how can I make more? And start asking, how can I need less? That's the moment real wealth begins to grow. Most of the time, people quit just before compounding gets interesting. They expect results too soon, and when they don't see fireworks, they give up. But compounding hides its magic. The early years feel like nothing is happening because the gains are small, but they're small and growing. A rational person doesn't judge progress by size, he judges it by direction. Once you're moving forward consistently, time becomes your ally. You just have to stay out of your own way. There's another hidden benefit in saving that first real amount. It builds self-respect. You start to see yourself as capable of restraint in a world that glorifies indulgence. That kind of identity shift has enormous value. You stop being swayed by fads and opinions. You become harder to manipulate. You start to rely on your own judgment. That's worth far more than any stock tip or investment formula. And of course, discipline compounds too. The same patience that helps you save your first few $100,000 will serve you everywhere, in business, in relationships, in health, in learning. The world rewards consistency more than brilliance. Most of life's success comes from avoiding stupidity and staying the course while others self-destruct. The trouble is, people confuse discipline with deprivation. They think saving means missing out, but it's the opposite. Discipline gives you choices. It gives you time. It gives you the quiet confidence that you can handle uncertainty. Without it, you're at the mercy of luck. With it, you can outlast chaos. Every investor eventually learns that survival is underrated. I've lived long enough to see markets collapse, economies stumble, and fashions change. The people who endure aren't the geniuses, they're the steady ones. They keep cash when others overextend. They buy when others panic. They stay humble when others get drunk on success. That temperament doesn't appear by accident. It's forged through years of disciplined habits. That's what your first $300,000 teaches you. When you finally reach that point, you realize it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the person you became while earning it. You built a mind that can wait, a will that can resist nonsense, a perspective that sees beyond the next quarter or the next fad. Those traits are permanent. The money is temporary. Even if you lost it all, you could rebuild it because you've developed the one skill that never depreciates: rational patience. It's tempting to look at others who seem to get ahead faster and feel envy. But remember, most fast success is borrowed from the future. Debt-fueled, hype-driven, or luck-dependent success rarely lasts. Steady progress looks dull from the outside, but feels peaceful on the inside. You go to bed knowing your fate isn't hanging on one roll of the dice. That peace is worth more than returns. And yet, This kind of patience is disappearing. Everyone wants to look smart instead of be sensible. They want to double their money overnight instead of protect it for decades. The world keeps rewarding the loudest voices, not the quietest thinkers. But the truth doesn't change. The path is the same as it's always been. Earn, save, invest, wait. Those 4 words will beat 90% of humanity over a lifetime. The irony is that once you've mastered this kind of discipline, you stop thinking about money all the time. You realize it's just a tool for independence, not identity. That mental distance is what makes you powerful in a world addicted to urgency. You can afford to be calm while others panic. And once you've earned that calm, the next stage begins learning how to think clearly while your money starts to work for you. That's the quiet moment when the game changes. You've spent years working for money, and now, if you've done things right, your money starts working for you. It doesn't happen all at once, it sneaks up on you. One day you realize that your investments grew while you were sleeping. The compounding that once felt slow now begins to feel inevitable. That's when your psychology shifts. You stop thinking like a laborer and start thinking like a steward. The irony is that the psychological transformation is far more valuable than the financial one. Anyone can save a few dollars. Not everyone can learn to stop being anxious about them. The real reward of reaching that first few $100,000 isn't the freedom to spend, it's the freedom from worry. You start to understand the rhythm of compounding, the pace of long-term growth, and you realize that wealth is a patient game played by people who can stand still while the world trembles. Once you've crossed that threshold, your sense of time changes. You stop caring about daily noise. A market dip becomes an opportunity, not a crisis. You no longer feel the impulse to react to every headline. That's the moment compounding starts doing its job. It's not just your capital that compounds, it's your confidence, your temperament, your judgment. Those are the real multipliers of wealth. It's a strange thing, but the richer you become in temperament, the less the money controls you. When you first start saving, every dollar feels precious, and you worry about losing it. Once you've built some capital and learned patience, the money becomes a tool, not a tether. You stop clinging to it. You start managing it like an adult. You realize that real wealth is measured in choices, not possessions. At that point, you also begin to see through the illusions that trap most people. You notice how frantic the financial world is, how investors constantly predict, trade, and chase every new idea. You used to think they were sophisticated. Now you see they're just impatient. They don't own investments. Their investments own them. The market pulls their emotions around like a puppet string. The irony is that they're doing more but achieving less. I've often said that the biggest advantage you can have in investing is a long attention span. The ability to sit quietly while others panic is worth more than any MBA or algorithm. When you have that $300,000 buffer, you can afford to be patient. You can wait for rational opportunities. You can let time and discipline do the compounding while everyone else self-destructs with activity. That's the psychological dividend of saving early and living below your means. You start to realize that money isn't a finish line, it's a mirror. It reflects your habits, your fears, your understanding of value. If you're still restless, insecure, or greedy after saving a few $100,000, you won't find peace at $1 million either. The same weaknesses that made you impatient while broke will make you reckless when rich. Compounding doesn't fix character, it exposes it. When you build your wealth the slow, disciplined way, you develop a kind of moral muscle memory. You learn to wait without resentment. You learn to see volatility as opportunity, not danger. You'll learn to ignore the applause of the crowd and trust your own reasoning. Over time, that mindset spreads into every part of life. You become calmer in relationships, more deliberate in work, more skeptical of shortcuts. Wealth becomes not just what you have, but how you think. The trouble is, most people never give themselves the time to experience that transformation. They keep chasing excitement, mistaking motion for progress. They get addicted to the idea that they must constantly do something. But compounding punishes activity and rewards inaction. Once you understand that, you stop fiddling with your portfolio and start focusing on your principles. The key word is restraint. The same patience that helped you save the first $300,000 will now protect it from being squandered. The market constantly tempts you with opportunity, but most of it is just noise disguised as news. The real investor learns to do less. He spends his time reading, thinking, and waiting. He doesn't need to look busy to feel important. He measures progress in years, not in trades. And with that patience comes a deeper satisfaction. You no longer need to prove anything. You built your independence quietly. You can watch the world chase trends and fads without feeling envy. The same market that once frightened you becomes predictable in its madness. You've learned that the crowd always moves from euphoria to despair and back again, and that the best money is made in silence between those swings. That inner stillness is what I call psychological wealth. It's not about luxury, it's about control, the ability to decide what matters and ignore the rest. The freedom to act rationally in a world that constantly rewards emotion. The calm that comes from knowing your future isn't at the mercy of luck or fashion. Once you feel that, you understand why true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in detachment. Of course, the next challenge begins once you reach that stage. You've built your discipline, you've earned your freedom, and now the danger shifts. The threat isn't failure anymore, it's arrogance. The moment you start believing that you're invincible, that the rules of patience and prudence no longer apply to you, you invite ruin back into your life. Success has a way of dulling the very instincts that created it. That's why the next lesson after compounding is humility. It's the recognition that you're never as smart as you think and never as safe as you feel. Every fortune has within it the seeds of its own destruction if the owner forgets the principles that built it. The same patience that made you rich must now protect you from yourself. The great danger of success is that it whispers lies into your ear. It tells you that you've figured it out, that the rules that applied on the way up no longer apply to you. You start believing that judgment can be substituted with confidence, that past victories guarantee future wins. I've seen that story play out more times than I can count, and it almost always ends the same way, with humility reintroduced through loss. When you finally have that $300,000 working for you, the temptation grows to get clever. You start thinking you can predict markets, that you can bend the odds with intelligence alone. But intelligence is a poor substitute for temperament. The market doesn't reward IQ, it rewards discipline under pressure. I've seen geniuses blow up fortunes because they couldn't tolerate looking stupid for a few months. They wanted to outperform everyone, and the need to look smart is fatal to long-term investing. At this stage, the danger isn't failure, it's overconfidence. You forget that compounding is fragile. It depends entirely on your ability to avoid big mistakes. A single reckless decision can destroy the benefits of decades of patience. That's the tragedy of hubris. Success makes you forget the cost of error. The market has a wonderful way of reminding people who they are. It doesn't care about your degree, your reputation, or your past performance. It only cares about your behavior. When prices fall, it reveals who was swimming naked, as Warren likes to say. That's why I always tell people, if you want to stay rich, assume you can lose it all and behave accordingly. Fear, when it's rational, is a form of intelligence. People think the hardest part of investing is picking winners. It's not. The hardest part is resisting the need to tinker, to prove your brilliance, to act when inaction is the better choice. The great investors aren't the ones who know everything, they're the ones who know when to sit quietly. It takes real maturity to do nothing while others are making noise. The problem is, the world keeps rewarding noise. That's why humility is so essential. You have to constantly remind yourself that you're capable of being wrong. You have to keep your ego on a leash, or it'll drag you into situations where you have no business being. Every time I see someone overextend on leverage, chase a hot stock, or follow the latest trend, I see the same disease, the illusion of control. People can't stand the idea that randomness plays a role in their success. But luck is always in the mix. Pretending otherwise is arrogance disguised as confidence. The antidote is to build systems that protect you from yourself. Diversify sensibly. Keep cash. Avoid what you don't understand. Remember that every investment looks easy in hindsight. The great fortunes are built not by constant brilliance, but by constant avoidance of stupidity. In the end, staying rich is a subtraction game. It's about what you refuse to do. Another subtle danger that comes with success is lifestyle inflation. Once people start seeing returns, they immediately upgrade everything. Bigger house, nicer car, more expensive habits. What they don't realize is that every upgrade becomes a new baseline. What used to feel luxurious becomes normal, and now you need even more to feel satisfied. You've turned your own comfort into a treadmill. That's why I've always believed that the ultimate luxury is simplicity. The fewer moving parts in your life, the fewer ways it can fall apart. Every unnecessary expense is a small claim on your freedom. Every new indulgence comes with hidden maintenance. You don't see it in the brochure, but it's there in the time, attention, and energy it steals. Staying humble financially means staying nimble. I've known people who could retire decades earlier, but didn't because they couldn't stop expanding their lifestyle. They told themselves they deserved it. They worked hard, so they should enjoy the fruits. There's nothing wrong with enjoying success, but the key is proportion. Don't let luxury become dependency. The man who needs constant novelty to feel content is poor in spirit, no matter how much he earns. Once you realize that happiness is a byproduct of restraint, not consumption, you begin to see wealth differently. You start valuing margin of safety over status, liquidity over leverage, and peace of mind over public admiration. That's how you preserve not just your capital, but your sanity. I've watched plenty of people make a fortune only to lose it chasing one more deal, one more bet, one more round of applause. They couldn't walk away when they were ahead because their ego couldn't tolerate boredom. They wanted to keep proving themselves. But the need to prove is just insecurity in disguise. The real goal isn't to win endlessly, it's to reach a point where you no longer need to play. So when you reach that $300,000 mark, remind yourself that the purpose of money is freedom, not validation. The less you feel the urge to show it off, the more power it gives you. Quiet wealth is stable wealth. It grows in peace, protected by humility and patience. And once you've internalized that lesson, the next phase begins learning how to preserve not just your money, but your mindset, in a world determined to separate you from both. The biggest threat to a stable mindset is success that outpaces maturity. When your balance sheet grows faster than your self-awareness, trouble is coming. Money amplifies whatever is already inside you. If you're anxious, it gives you new things to worry about. If you're arrogant, it gives you more people to talk down to. That's why preserving your mindset is harder than preserving your money. One bad decision of character can undo decades of good judgment. It's easy to think that once you're financially comfortable, you'll automatically become calm and rational. But human nature doesn't reset with your net worth. The same impulses that made you restless when you were broke, envy, greed, insecurity, will still be there, just dressed in nicer clothes. If you don't learn to manage them early, they'll manage you later. The world will tempt you constantly to abandon your principles. When you have money, people appear with opportunities, advice, and praise. They'll tell you you're brilliant, that you can't lose, that you should think bigger. But most of what they're really doing is trying to use your success for their own. If you don't develop a thick filter for nonsense, you'll get caught in other people's momentum. And that's how disciplined investors become reckless speculators. Staying grounded requires brutal honesty about your own limits. It means reminding yourself that you're still capable of error, still vulnerable to bias, still human. You never graduate from the laws of probability or human folly. They're always waiting, like gravity. The moment you think you can float above them, you fall. The older I get, the more I believe that humility is just realism practiced daily. It's not about pretending to be small. It's about seeing the world as it is, unpredictable, indifferent, full of traps, and choosing to act rationally anyway. You can't eliminate uncertainty, but you can refuse to let it drive you mad. That's the real discipline of a lifelong investor. One of the smartest things you can do after you reach some financial stability is to deliberately simplify your life again. People think more money means you can handle more complexity, but usually it's the opposite. Complexity breeds fragility. It gives you more things to lose, more moving parts to manage, more reasons to stay awake at night. The best investors I've known live surprisingly simple lives. Their minds are uncluttered because their priorities are clear. That simplicity extends to how they think about wealth itself. They know the difference between being rich and being trapped by riches. They keep their costs low, their habits consistent, and their circle small. They don't need to broadcast their success because they aren't trying to prove it to anyone. That's the kind of stability money can't buy. You have to cultivate it. Another discipline that matters at this stage is gratitude. It sounds soft, but it's strategic. Gratitude is the only mental state that blocks envy, and envy is the root of most financial stupidity. The moment you start comparing yourself to others, you stop thinking clearly. You forget your own plan and start reacting to theirs. Gratitude keeps you anchored. It reminds you that freedom, not superiority, was the point all along. I've often said that envy is the silliest of the 7 deadly sins. It's the only one that gives you no pleasure at all, just pain. Yet most people live their lives ruled by it. They see someone who made a lucky bet or inherited a windfall, and they suddenly feel inadequate. They abandon sound judgment for imitation. That's how bubbles form, and that's how fortunes vanish. A calm investor understands that other people's luck has nothing to do with his own results. There's also the danger of boredom. Once your finances are in good shape, life becomes quieter, and that quiet can feel empty to those addicted to drama. Many people sabotage themselves simply because they can't stand stability. They seek stimulation where they should seek peace. The mature mind learns to enjoy the calm. It treats boredom as a signal that things are working, not as a problem to fix. When you protect your mindset, you stop reacting to noise. You start operating from principles instead of impulses. You understand that your greatest edge isn't your intelligence, it's your emotional stability. A calm investor can see what others can't because his judgment isn't clouded by panic or excitement. That's why the game gets easier once you learn not to play emotionally. You have to remember that financial freedom isn't just freedom from work, it's freedom from mental noise. You don't owe the world an opinion about every market move or economic forecast. You owe yourself the discipline to think clearly when others can't. That kind of clarity is rare, and it's earned through deliberate calmness, not constant action. If you can preserve that clarity, you'll notice a quiet transformation. The same patience that made you wealthy starts improving the rest of your life. You become less reactive, more thoughtful, harder to offend. You begin to value your peace more than your profit. And that shift, valuing peace over profit, is the surest sign that you finally learned what freedom really feels like. But, of course, freedom isn't a permanent state. It can vanish the moment you forget what bought it. The next challenge is protecting it from the subtle enemies that come disguised as success: vanity, pride, and the need to appear more important than you really are. Vanity is a strange thing. It's the desire to look wise rather than be wise, to appear free rather than live free. It creeps in quietly once people start calling you successful. You begin to think you need to project that image, that somehow your worth depends on being noticed. But the minute you care about appearing rich, you've surrendered the peace that comes with actually being rich. Freedom doesn't need witnesses. The great irony of success is that it often pushes you back toward the very trap you worked to escape. You wanted independence, but now you find yourself seeking validation again, this time in subtler forms. It's no longer about survival. It's about status. You start comparing your independence to someone else's luxury, your peace to someone else's applause. Before long, you're right back in the game of needing more. The numbers changed, but the mindset didn't. I've watched this cycle destroy plenty of smart people. They reach financial stability, then inflate their egos to match their bank accounts. They start believing that success in one domain gives them wisdom in all others. They talk more, listen less, and take bigger risks because they think they've earned immunity from mistakes. The market is patient, but it's merciless. It has a perfect record of humbling the overconfident. The antidote to vanity is the same as the antidote to fear: realism. When you see the world clearly, you stop needing it to admire you. You realize that most people are too busy with their own worries to care about yours. The only person you have to impress is the one staring back in the mirror, and that person is hard to fool. If you can end each day knowing you behaved rationally, you've done enough. The applause of others is just noise. The simplest way to stay humble is to stay a student. Even at 90, I still read, still learn, still assume there's something I don't understand. Ignorance is infinite, knowledge is not. The moment you think you've mastered something, life finds a new way to test you. Continuous learning is the cheapest insurance against stupidity. It keeps your ego small and your judgment fresh. People often ask why I still study after decades of success. The answer is simple. Curiosity protects me from arrogance. When you're genuinely curious, you can't be smug. You can't feel superior to reality. You're too busy trying to understand it. And the world, as it turns out, never stops changing. The same principles still apply: patience, simplicity, discipline, but the environment always finds new ways to test whether you truly believe them. Another quiet enemy of freedom is comfort. Once you get used to comfort, you'll do anything to keep it. You stop taking smart risks, stop pushing your mind, stop tolerating uncertainty. Comfort can turn even the disciplined into the complacent. That's why it's important to keep small doses of discomfort in your life. Read things that challenge you. Spend time with people who tell you the truth. Practice doing without something you think you need. It sharpens your perspective. In a world obsessed with speed, comfort, and visibility, it's a radical act to be content, patient, and private. But that's what real independence looks like. It's the quiet confidence to live by your own logic, regardless of what the herd is doing. The world calls that boring. I call it sanity. You can't think clearly if you're constantly reacting to the noise of others. Silence is a competitive advantage in a society that never shuts up. One of the things I've learned is that true freedom doesn't look glamorous. It looks ordinary from the outside, simple home, old car, quiet routines. But inside that simplicity lives something rare, peace of mind, the ability to wake up without dread, the luxury of spending a day on what matters, the absence of desperate ambition. Most people overlook this kind of wealth because it doesn't photograph well, but it's the only kind worth building. You'll know you've reached real freedom when your decisions stop being dictated by fear or envy. When you can look at an opportunity and say, no, I don't need it, without feeling loss. When you can enjoy another person's success without comparing it to your own. When you can go through an entire day without thinking about how you're being perceived. That's the level of wealth that no market correction can take away. It's a peculiar truth that the greatest reward of compounding isn't material, it's emotional. Over time, the calm you build becomes its own dividend. The same habits that created your financial independence create emotional independence. You stop swinging with the moods of the world. You stop panicking at the headlines. You stop chasing every opportunity because you finally understand that opportunity isn't rare, discipline is. Most people don't want freedom. They want permission. They want someone else to tell them it's okay to live differently, to slow down, to stop chasing. But freedom doesn't wait for approval. It's something you claim quietly by acting according to your own reason. You'll be criticized for it, of course. The world doesn't like people who opt out of its games. But in time, you'll notice that the loudest critics are usually the least content. So protect your freedom by keeping your desires small and your standards high. Don't let money or the attention it brings convince you to trade simplicity for status. You'll never regret being underestimated by the crowd, but you'll regret overestimating yourself. The moment you think you're too smart to fail is the moment you stop listening to reality, and reality always has the final word. And once you've understood that, once you've seen through the illusions of wealth, comfort, and vanity, something surprising happens. You discover that the ultimate reward of financial freedom isn't money at all. It's time. Time to think, to rest, to choose what matters without interference. Time is the one asset you can never compound. You can save it, you can waste it, but you can't manufacture more of it. The reason you build wealth isn't to buy more things, it's to buy more time spent on the right things. You save money so you can reclaim your hours from foolish obligations, meaningless work, and people who drain you. That's the part they never teach you about financial freedom. It's not about stopping work. It's about stopping compulsory work. The greatest luxury is waking up and deciding what to do with your day, not because you're lazy, but because you finally earned the right to choose. Freedom is control over your own calendar. I've seen rich men who were prisoners of their schedules, running from meeting to meeting like overpaid servants. They mistook activity for importance. They didn't own their time, so they didn't own their life. That's not success. That's just a more expensive form of captivity. When you reach the point where money works for you, you have to ask yourself what you're working for. Most people never stop to think about that question. They keep climbing without knowing what mountain they're on. I've watched people who hit every financial milestone only to end up restless, disoriented, and lonely. They were so focused on getting rich, they never learned how to live rich in spirit, not in lifestyle. That's the quiet tragedy of ambition without reflection. You can win the game of money and still lose the game of life. The scoreboard doesn't measure wisdom or contentment. It measures only accumulation, and accumulation never ends. If you don't know what enough means, even victory will feel like defeat. You'll keep chasing numbers that don't care about you. The market will always whisper more, and you'll always listen, because you never learned how to say enough. Money, at its best, is a teacher. It teaches patience, humility, restraint, and gratitude. But if you ignore the lessons, it turns into a tyrant. It becomes the thing that defines your worth instead of the thing that supports your purpose. I've always believed that the right way to live is to let money serve you quietly in the background, never the other way around. The moment you start serving it, you've already lost your freedom. People ask me what they should do once they have financial security. My answer is simple. Think. Use your freedom to cultivate judgment, to contribute to something that outlasts you. The happiest people I know are the ones who found a purpose larger than themselves. It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to matter to you. Freedom without purpose decays into boredom. Purpose gives structure to your freedom. It turns idle time into meaningful time. And don't think purpose has to mean constant motion. The culture glorifies busyness, but busyness is a form of laziness. It's easier to stay occupied than to think deeply. Thinking requires stillness, and stillness feels uncomfortable when you're used to chasing distractions. But all the real insights about money, about people, about life come from long periods of quiet observation. Learn to sit with your thoughts. It's cheaper than any seminar and far more useful. When you have time and peace of mind, you start noticing small joys that used to pass you by. The quiet satisfaction of doing something well, the beauty of an unhurried conversation, the relief of not needing to prove yourself. Those things don't cost anything, but they're invisible to people who are rushing. The faster you chase pleasure, the less of it you actually feel. It's patience, again, that converts time into meaning. The funny thing is, the habits that make you financially free, patience, simplicity, long-term thinking, are the same habits that make you emotionally free. The same discipline that kept you from spending foolishly now keeps you from reacting foolishly. The same restraint that protected your capital protects your peace. It's all one system of behavior, applied to different forms of